much. Hi, good morning. If we've not met before, my name's Fiona. I'm a member here at Rehope Southside. I'm also the Vice Principal of Scotland Bible School, which is the Bible. That's the Bible school that Rehope started a few years ago. So Brian obviously isn't here this week. Crooksey's also not here, so they called in the B team, and that's me. I don't know to say that with myself. But I'm also not going to say I'm the A team either, because it's literally not factually true. But I was saying this last night. I feel like I'm like the Michael Bublé of Rehope Southside preachers, because I just get like wheeled out at Advent, like Christmas time, and here I am in May. So I'm like, oh, this feels very, very different. We're carrying on with the James series, so we're just going to pick up with the next passage, and that's in chapter 5. Now, like I said, I am like a Bible teacher. I would say I'm a Bible teacher before I'm a preacher. So today, I'm just going to approach this passage in a very similar way that like we would do at the Bible school, like that we would teach our students to do. And when we come to a book or a passage for the first time, what we want to do is we want to try and like discern the main idea, just like what's the main thing that the author is actually trying to say. And this would apply like if we're reading like a whole book, if we're reading a section of a book, if we're reading even just a paragraph, like what we're always kind of trying to do is just find like what's the main idea. Now, Brian kind of throughout this series has been saying that kind of like the main thing, like the main idea that James has been saying to his audience is that he wants them to think differently and just do it. So that's kind of like a main idea of the entire book. And we're going to look at a new passage today. And we're going to look at kind of how specifically James is wanting them to think different and what he specifically wants them to just do. So a main way that we can kind of spot the main idea of a passage is just by looking at repetitions. So if we were to read through and if something keeps getting repeated, whether it's a word or an idea, like a theme, then probably that's important. If the author keeps repeating it, they're probably emphasizing it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read the passage that we're covering today, which is James 5, 7 to 12. And as I read, I want you guys reading and observing with me and trying to spot any repetitions, trying to spot the main idea. Everyone all right with that? Understand the instructions? Afterwards, I will call out and ask if anyone has any ideas, okay? So just no one panic, but be looking. Okay, James 5, 7 to 12 says, "Dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. Consider the farmers who patiently wait for the rains in the fall and in the spring. They eagerly look for the valuable harvest to ripen. You too must be patient. Take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. Don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. For look, the judge is standing at the door. For examples of patience in suffering, dear brothers and sisters, look at the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We give great honor to those who endure under suffering. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance. You can see how the Lord was kind to him at the end, for the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. But most of all, brothers and sisters, never take an oath by heaven or earth or anything else. Just simply say yes or no, so that you will not sin and be condemned." Right, did anyone spot any repetitions? Any ideas? Oh, Duncan, you're patience, well done, yes, absolutely. I would say patience is a key thing. I think other things are mentioned. Other things are definitely mentioned. A few things are repeated. But there's like a command to be patient. They're to consider the farmers as an example of patience. Patience is connected to courage. Also, like the prophets are given as an example of patience. But there definitely does seem to be a connection to endurance. Like James is connecting patience to endurance. And Job is given as an example of that. He's not just patient in suffering, but he endures during suffering as well. And there's also mention of the Lord's return, like Jesus' return. Like that's what they're supposed to be patient in as they wait for his coming. James says that it's near, and he's referred to as the judge. Jesus is referred to as the judge, which means that when he does come, then he's going to do so in judgment. So if this is new to you, just to say, like, Jesus came once and he's coming back, but actually, like, he's coming back to restore and he's coming back to judge. So, summary of this passage, it very much does seem like the main idea that James is writing to the Jewish believers about is patience, but it's connected to suffering, it's connected to endurance, and it's connected to Christ's return. So when I started reading this, I was wondering, why the original audience needed this kind of encouragement, the command, kind of what's going on. Why is James writing this? And in order to understand better what this specific passage is saying, why James wrote it, then I think we need to zoom out. We need to zoom out a little, consider the kind of context, consider the bigger picture, what's been said around in the rest of the letter. And even just immediately, like what came immediately before. Well, last week, Brian preached on wealth, specifically the dangers of it. And in James chapter 5, verse 4, this is one of the verses that comes like directly before this passage. That reads, "For listen, hear the cries of the field workers whom you have cheated out of their pay. The cries of those who harvest your fields have reached the ears of the Lord of heaven's armies." So we can see from this passage that within the audience, within that community, it seems that people are being cheated out of their pay. So we can see some sort of financial injustice taking place in the community. Now, if we zoom further out and we go back to chapter 2, so chapter 2, verse 5 to 7, it says, "Listen to me, dear brothers and sisters. Hasn't God chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith? Aren't they the ones who will inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you dishonor the poor. Isn't it the rich who oppress you and drag you into court? Aren't they the ones who slander Jesus Christ, whose noble name you bear?" So, again, just from the context of James, we can see that there seems to be injustice happening in the court systems. There seems to be legal injustice going on too. And it's specifically that the wealthy are creating injustice for the poor. And again, this is likely in their own meeting places. The Jewish believers would have had their own court system. We're not talking about them going to a kind of Roman or Gentile court at the time. So there's injustice in the community. And again, if we look back even further and we go to James chapter 2, verse 3, it says, "If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, 'You can stand over there, or else sit on the floor,' well, doesn't that discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives?" So again, we can see that there seems to be social injustice in the church community as well. So putting this all together, from the book of James itself, not even going outside to any other commentary, Bible dictionary, etc., we can just see that there seems to be financial injustice, where people are not being paid their earned wage. There's legal injustice, where the wealthy are influencing legal outcomes. And then there's also social injustice and partiality within the church community. And if you're new and you haven't been part of the James series so far, James has been going through the letter and making clear that these injustices are not okay. And he's been challenging them. But now, in this passage, in chapter 5, he seems to be turning to the oppressed, the ones who are actually going through them, and he's calling them out, and he's calling them to patience. So he's speaking to those who are suffering under these oppressions and injustices, and he's calling them to patience. But I don't think he's just talking about patience. He's not just talking about patience, because there seems to be a wee bit of an interchange where he's going back and forth between things. So he talks about patience, and then he talks about something else, and then he talks about patience again, and then he talks about something else. So if we look back through that passage, if we kind of go back to James 5, 7 to 12, then we can see in verse 7 and 8, James is commanding them to be patient. They're to be patient as they wait for the Lord's return. And like farmers, as an example of this, like as farmers waited for the rain, they are to wait for the Lord's return for that valuable harvest. So there's this like command for patience. But then in verse 9, then there's this command not to grumble about each other. And that's entirely connected to Jesus being judge, because the judge is coming soon. So James has established that the Lord's return is near. He's going to come in judgment. And that's in verse 9. So we go patience to this command not to grumble. And then in verse 10 and 11, he goes back to patience again and gives examples of people who have been patient. So like the prophets, and then Job is an example of endurance. So he kind of progresses from patience to endurance. And then in verse 12, he goes down and says, never take an oath. And he says just to say like a simple yes or no. So like I said, James has been addressing these various injustices in this letter. The oppression, the partiality within the church. He's called them out for the evil that they are. He said that this is not okay. He's calling the believers to humility and to love and to unity. But now, in this passage, he is very much addressing those who have been oppressed, calling them to patience. But that's not all, because if we kind of boil down this kind of interchange in what he's doing, like back and forth, and we look at the commonality between grumbling and making oaths, then it seems like James is going back and forth between patience and how they are choosing to speak in response to their circumstances. So it's like patience and then this warning about their speech, controlling their tongue. And that's what he's going back and forth about. Just specifically, it's grumbling, and then specifically, it's oath-making. And that makes sense, because James has kind of made clear, again, sorry if you weren't here, if you go back to like chapter 3, he makes abundantly clear it's very important for the believers to know how to control their speech. So by interchanging these points back and forth, it seems like James is addressing those who have experienced injustice. But what he's saying is that experiencing injustice does not give you the right to say whatever you want. Specifically, to use your speech to grumble, to judge others, to speak harshly or quickly, because that will actually lead to their judgment. So instead, when they are faced with these various expressions of injustice, James is calling them to patience. So then looking at kind of like the context of this letter and then thinking, well, what does patience actually mean? It seems like patience is described here as waiting with self-restraint, which does not hastily retaliate a wrong, specifically with speech. So I'll say that again. It seems like James in this context is defining patience as waiting with self-restraint that does not hastily retaliate a wrong, specifically with speech. And like, why are they not supposed to be quickly retaliating? Well, James is showing that they do this because those wrongs are going to be judged. They're just going to be judged by someone else. Like, there's only one man who is able to justly judge the world, and his name is Jesus. And I think that's why then there's this repetition of Christ's return, the command to wait patiently even in suffering, because there is a certainty that Christ is coming back, and when he does, he is going to judge the living and the dead. And then, in order to kind of comfort and spur on his audience, James reminds them of the prophets, because they were such an example of patience and suffering. And I mean, like, why were they examples of this? Well, I'm not being funny, but if you have read the prophets, like, they had a life. They had a difficult life. I mean, they had a wild revelation of who God was. Like, we have this beautiful portion of the Bible from Isaiah to Malachi, and these men, they were one that God spoke to, and then they were able to speak the word of God out to his people. And, like, they had wild revelation. You know, like Isaiah saw in the throne room, Ezekiel's getting visions, like, just Daniel is just, like, dreaming like there's no tomorrow. Or no, he is dreaming about tomorrow because God is telling him what's happening in the future. But, like, they are having a wild revelation of God. But they had some serious trials and they had some serious suffering. Like, half of them are just called to speak the word of God, and God prefaces it by saying, and nobody's going to listen to you. Like, it's going to literally fall on deaf ears. Like, how disheartening to begin with. You know, they were ridiculed. They were persecuted. They were killed. But, like, all of them were so faithful to the call that God had given them. Like, even though people did not listen to them and they were treated unjustly, like, they held fast to God. And they trusted him. They trusted in his mercy, and they trusted in his vindication. Like, some examples of the prophets, Isaiah, like, the Jewish tradition is that he was sawn in half. Like, it says that in Hebrews chapter 11, it says that some were even sawn in half. The Jewish tradition is that that was Isaiah, even though he's not named. Jeremiah, beaten, imprisoned, thrown in a cistern, like, forcibly taken to Egypt, just repeatedly rejected by his own people. Ezekiel, he cooked food over dung. Like, I don't want to do that. Do you know what I mean? I'm not jealous of him. Daniel, exiled to Babylon, persecuted for prayer and being faithful to God, thrown in a lion's den. Do you know what I mean? And you can tell that Crooksy made these slides. Because never once have I said, yikes, bro. Hosea, he married a prostitute who was unfaithful to him. You know, like, the prophets lived a hard life. All of these men patiently endured their suffering, though. Like, they physically endured, but it's because they trusted God. Like, Job was a man who endured during suffering. And, like, this isn't the first time that James is talking about endurance in his book. Back in chapter 1, he talks about endurance. In chapter 1, verse 2 to 4, it says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be perfect and complete, needing nothing." And then down in verse 12, it says, "God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterwards, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him." So, if we look at this, like, from the context of this letter, we can see that James has made clear that God is not promising a life without troubles, without testing, without temptations. Like, he starts his letter with that reality. And then at this point in the letter, he's highlighted some of the very specific troubles and, like, trials that the audience is experiencing, is going to experience. And specifically ones that are being created by other believers. But the unique thing about Job in this example, is that he was a man who suffered. And, like, his story was that his friends were trying to convince him that, like, he'd done something wrong, that God was punishing him for what happened. And endurance in his story looked like questioning, you know, why things were happening, like what was happening. But he held fast the reality that it wasn't because God was punishing him. That he held fast the fact that God is trustworthy and that he was always his redeemer and his helper. So, and James actually highlights the tenderness and the mercy of God in Job's story. So the prophets and Job, like, they all trusted God. And that is absolutely essential to have patience in this life. And like we can see from James that injustice and oppression like definitely present in the believers' lives. But we can also see how God feels about it. Like he does not like it. From James, we can see that the will and the desire of God is for justice. Like fair treatment, quick, swift justice, impartiality. Because God does not just promise justice at the end of the age. Like there are many examples in Scripture where justice happens and it happens in the moment. In Genesis, Hagar vindicated in the wilderness after she's been treated so harshly by Sarah. Also in Genesis, Joseph, he has a hard run, to say the least. But there's like a reversal of the injustices that were done to him by his brothers, like in his life. There's justice for David against King Saul. So the Bible just makes clear that God brings justice in real time, and he promises justice at the end of the age. And believing that is absolutely necessary for the audience to think differently and choose patience. Like they need to think about their current circumstances through the reality that God is judge. Now there will be a final judgment when Christ returns, and all are going to be held to account. Because it doesn't seem like the believers that James is writing to are currently seeing their treatment and the injustice through that lens. Because it seems like their current response is grumbling. Now, what does that word actually mean? What does grumbling mean? I think about the wilderness years, because that word is used a lot in kind of Exodus, Numbers, to describe the Israelites. And they grumbled against Moses, they grumbled against God. And what that looked like was accusing others, holding resentment, harboring frustration or bitterness or anger. And it looked like impatience. So what James is saying here is that when experiencing troubles, specifically injustice, he wants them to see that that doesn't actually give them the right to hold on to resentment or frustration or bitterness, to accuse others or create even more disunity in the body. Being a victim of injustice does not give a believer the right to take judgment or matters into their own hands. It does not provide an excuse or an opportunity for resentment or bitterness. It's a bit challenging, but one of the most palatable excuses for our own sinful attitudes or actions is being a victim of injustice or wrongdoing. But James is actually making clear here that there's no excuse. And I think that helps tie in the last verse of verse 12 in this passage, where it says, most of all, never take an oath by heaven or earth or anything else, just a simple yes or no, so you will not sin and be condemned. I think by starting most of all, James is kind of saying that he's kind of getting to the kind of big point. And it seems like out of all the manifestations of impatience, in times of stress or affliction, the most frequent and tempting thing is to make hasty and irreverent oaths. When we become impatient and lose self-control, I don't know about you, but I feel like we can tend to say things that were better left unspoken. And it was their culture to make binding oaths and promises, often by things bigger than themselves, greater than themselves. So that's why you would make an oath by God or heaven or earth, which is mentioned in this passage. But James is pointing out the dangers of this, especially when making oaths in the middle of troubles. Now, oaths like this might not seem super common practice today, but we can say rash things that we would not say normally when we are in a time of stress. Especially when we've been wronged. I will never forgive them. I will make them pay. I will prove them wrong. Like, we can say things that is like similar to this cultural practice that we see them doing. And if we don't see our circumstances and our situations through the reality of God's desire and his ability to bring justice now, or the reality that there is a final judgment that's promised at the end of the age, we will always be tempted to seek justice for ourselves. And that often looks like tearing others down, or partnering with jealousy or bitterness or resentment or unforgiveness. But when we do this, we are showing that we have a misunderstanding of God's character and his promises. And we're actually not trusting him to judge. And when we do that, we're actually making ourselves God, because we're putting ourselves in the position of judge, but that's his position. So no matter how much we've been wronged, we're never in a position where we're able to judge others. We're simply unable. We don't have the justice, we don't have the impartiality required for judgment. But Jesus in the Bible makes clear that we're actually called to do something else. We're called to forgive. And something I want to clarify is that forgiveness is not saying that something that's been done to you is okay. It's actually the opposite, because it's acknowledging that there's been a wrong done. It's acknowledging that there was an injustice that can't be repaid. So there were so many injustices in the early church. James is making that clear. He's making clear it's not okay and there's no excuse. And believers extending forgiveness to these things were not saying that they were okay. It's simply trusting God to judge those wrongs instead of themselves. What forgiveness is saying is that when a wrong has been committed, instead of carrying out justice for ourselves, we're going to release that wrong to the only one who is able to lovingly, justly judge what's happened. And then that actually means that we are free from all the things that spring from unforgiveness, like bitterness, resentment, anger, hate. They aren't pleasant. I hate feeling those things. It's heavy. But if you have those things in your life, if you're carrying resentment or bitterness or anger, the way to get rid of them is to forgive. The direct path to releasing them is choosing to forgive someone, because then as a side effect, the resentment, the hate, it just falls away. So James wants the Jewish believers to think differently and just do it. And that means when responding to the wrongs that have been done to them, he wants them to remember that God is judge, God alone, that he is trustworthy to handle how they've been treated, and as a result, live in patience, even in suffering, not taking judgment into their own hands. And he's saying that there is another way. And that way is one of freedom and empowerment. Forgiveness is one of the most empowering things that we can do. You're saying, see that wrong that was done to me? It's not going to have a hold on my life anymore. I am releasing it. It's not controlling my feelings. It's not controlling my actions. That person's actions, what was done to me, isn't controlling my life anymore. I am releasing that to the trustworthy God. And then he's going to deal with it in his own way, in his own time. And I'm just going to trust in that, and I'm just going to move on. Recently in BRT, we were reading the letters by Peter. And one of the passages really stood out to me. And it's First Peter, and it's in the context of slavery specifically, but I think there's something in this for all of us. When it's First Peter chapter 2, verse 18 to 20. And it says, "You who are slaves must submit to your masters with all respect. Do what they tell you, not only if they are kind and reasonable, but even if they are cruel. For God is pleased when, conscious of his will, you patiently endure unjust treatment. Of course, you get no credit for being patient if you are beaten for doing wrong. But if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God is pleased with you." So sometimes God deals with injustice right then and there. We have examples of that in the Bible. Other times, he is asking us to just endure unjust treatment patiently. But he's so pleased when we do, because we're acting as Jesus did. And to me, this is so comforting, because I struggle. I hate it when someone has totally misunderstood me and accused me of something that I haven't done, I'm not appreciated, or I've just experienced unjust treatment. I hate that. I hate it. And my flesh wants to prove that I didn't do anything wrong, I show, explain myself, highlight this injustice that's taken place. But over the last few years, God has really taught me that what matters far more than being seen as right in the eyes of another person is having my heart right before him, being seen before, by him. So when we patiently endure wrongdoing and forgive what's happened to us, he's so pleased by that. And if God is pleased with my attitude and my actions, then I'd like to think I actually couldn't care less what another person thought of me. Because just what's more important is my heart before the Lord. So if you are currently going through an injustice, whether it's you've been treated poorly, unfairly, friends, family, your work, a legal situation. Patience does not mean passive. James is not asking you simply just to accept what was done, to you as if it's okay, as if it wasn't wrong. James isn't saying, don't seek justice. He's just saying, don't use your voice to grumble and oath. Jesus teaches about persistent prayer. Praying for justice to be done is so, so important. Seeking justice on earth right now in the world in your lives is important. Jesus taught this. Matthew 5, verse 6 says, God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. Justice is so important to God. Patience, being patient, does not mean being passive. God wants his people to hunger and thirst for justice, but seeking justice from the one true judge, partnering with him to bring it, not getting it by your own means, not feeling like you have to vindicate yourself or prove yourself right in the eyes of the world. And if immediate justice just isn't going to happen for you, there is another way of that not consuming your life. And that pathway is forgiveness. So that's the challenges today. If you are currently experiencing injustice, I would just really encourage you, just take stock of your heart, in this moment. For the wrongs that have been done, who is judge over that situation in your heart right now? Is it you? Is it the Lord? So just first take a moment and just place him as judge over your life, over your own heart. And if an injustice has been done to you and you are holding on to unforgiveness, I so, so encourage you to forgive today. And that means just acknowledging that something wrong was done, but giving it to God. And then you get to leave here in freedom with that thing no longer having a hold on you. And what's better than that? Right, I'll invite Rita back up again, and I'll let her take it away.
Thanks, Fee. I feel encouraged.